How to leave a campaign. So this happened last night, leaving myself and the other players are aging. We have one player who since the start has been playing a bad rogue. 10 in intelligence, so no plus to checking for traps. They killed 2 NPCs randomly because they felt like it and tried stealing from the party a lot at the start as well. I shut that shit down there and then, but I don't allow for it conning that stuff as I run high roleplay games. I just told him out of character it wasn't tolerated as I originally told him in session 0. So that was 6 months ago. In today's session they took a teleportation trip back to where they first began and found a mystery they hadn't noticed before as wee baby level 2s. They found a mysterious room with a statue of Orcus and found deadly glyphs: power word kill, create undead, finger of death, teleport, and they activated in that exact order too. The rogue who had a 19 in intelligence now due to a headband of intellect decided to touch the power word kill glyph. They knew what it was as it had been identified correctly with rolls blah blah and it immediately killed her. To note, this was 100% metagaming and there is no way whatsoever that her character would have done this, to which all the players agreed, triggering the next glyph which raised her as a zombie. Then finger of death which one shot and killed the party's bard as he had just went down 2 seconds ago due to 2 traps hitting him. Then teleport and it whisked them away. The bard was absolutely gutted and had no idea he would die there and didn't want to. He nearly punched the rogue for doing that to him on purpose because he'd said clearly he was examining the glyph without setting it off, which meant he was next to it and the automatic target of the spell. And then teleport took them away from the party. Afterwards the player said he'd been wanting to leave for a while as he's got too many real life issues going on. I advised that was fine, but you didn't say a word to me about it, the DM, and that if he had I could have exited his character and he could have joined back if he ever had more time. But no, he decided to exit by killing another player, which he said he'd wanted to do for a while. So I said to the rogue I wasn't inviting him back again as he chose an immature way of leaving instead of simply speaking to me privately. And then I retconned the bard's death, so he's still alive by the skin of his teeth. As I'm not having a character I very much enjoy watching grow die like that in a malicious way. The only way a character dies in my campaigns is though enemies murdering them or the player's own stupidity. Never thought as a male player I would have to worry about my character being raped. Literally writing this in the middle of my session. I have been playing an ambiguously gay character in a Game of Thrones game taking place right where the books start. While we are sailing to King's Landing, DM made a roll and decided to sail as approached my character in the night. Another player, an autistic Irish gooey, decides to RP the sailors. They approached, basically demanding sex. I play my character ignorant, all the while worrying what he intends. This guy has no filter, no limits. Based on previous sessions and downtime talk, I realize the setting more than warrants rapes and such. And I'm not someone who is triggered by past experiences, since I've never been abused like that. But I think it's a pretty safe assumption I don't want to be raped. He says one of the sailors take out their dick and put it in my character's face. My character pushes it away, saying no thanks. He says, alright. The 2 sailors decide to go at it alone. And after a few minutes, they pull out to finish and jizz all over your face. I cut the character talk and said, no, that did not happen. Yes it did. That's totally what the sailors would do for being at ease. I almost had them rape you. I'm telling you right fucking now. That shit didn't happen. Or I'm leaving right this second. The solution? Instead of them jizzing on my face or raping me, they simply jizz all over my pillow as an insult for my teasing. I haven't spoken since it happened. He's saying, if you didn't want it to happen, you could have said, stop at any time. Didn't think it would have to be spoken. Funny part is, 2 new players just joined, although only one showed up in time for that lovely scene. So that's how this dude thinks to introduce them to the game. What a genius. Edit. Later in the session, the GM decided that it was all a fever dream my character had on the ship. Suppose that's the best case scenario where no one can think to do a full retcon. As of this update, I'm still in the game. Thanks to what turned out to be a troublesome newer player, I ended up having fun again by the end of the night. The dude apologized once he fully realized how pissed I was. However, he did think I was sad that it happened. Like I said above, not really triggered in a PTSD sort of way. More like a, you stupid motherfucker. What makes you think this is okay? Sort of way. Yesterday, my first D&D campaign came to a sudden, hideous end. I'm still kind of in shock, and I needed to get this written down so that it's out of my system. From what I've seen, there are way more fucked up stories on this subreddit, but I had to come out of my lurker shell for this because it got so incredibly bad. I've been playing in this group almost every week for half a year. In hindsight, I had different expectations about the game than they did, but I kind of liked the DM, and he was helping me learn the game. So I decided to stick around. I should mention that we had some history. Not only did we go to high school together, but I had a massive crush on him back then, and tried to ask him out several times. I knew he wasn't gay, so it was definitely wrong of me. But we were kids, and it's been ages since then. It shouldn't be relevant to this story, but it is. I grew up, he got married, and through a mutual friend on Steam, I ended up getting invited to his D&D game they played at his house. Seemed fun. I'd been wanting to try 5 years. I had the books for a while but no one to play the game with. My character was a high elf wizard named Apricot. In the DM's world, most elves are named after fruit, and I thought that seemed fun, so I ran with it. All races also have lifespans equal to humans in his world, so I decided to be a prodigious 10-year-old elf. She ended up mostly being the butt of the other players' jokes, but it never seemed all that mean-spirited, just some inside jokes about elves and their setting. I played her as a brilliant girl with a naive outlook on life, but infinite cheerfulness to back it up. So far so good. We started off the campaign with some interesting characters. One player used to be in the military. I think he actually was the first one to get the group together. And his character Brad was a human fighter. Some sort of homebrew gunslinger. It may have been Matt Mercer's class, but I'm not super familiar. Another guy was playing a snowflake, a goth halfling rogue with a tragic past. A character he came up with to make fun of tropes. It was a lot funnier than it sounds, and he played the character kind of well. The DM's wife was also playing as Lillian, a female dwarf paladin with a luxurious beard. She even wore a fake beard to the table a couple of times for fun. Finally, there was the youngest guy at the table, who was the DM's cousin. I never asked, but I think he's about 20 or younger, because the first time he had a beer at the table he winked at me and said, "Don't tell mommy." He was a bit weird, and played the zaniest character of the bunch, Marty McFly, the Arakakra barbarian. He was a paradman with a feather pattern that perfectly resembled a Lucha Damask, and he constantly tried to suplex people from the air. We started off at 3rd level, and things went smoothly for the first couple of sessions. Our party was surprisingly lucky with dice rolls when it mattered most, and each boss encounter went down like it was nothing. Every now and then an enemy thug hirelings, bandits and the like would almost kill Apricot, but Marty always came in at the right moment with an elbow drop or whatever. We were all having fun. I'd forgotten my embarrassment about my past with the DM, and we only missed a couple of sessions. I was thoroughly enjoying my first 5e campaign, and grew pretty attached to my character after a while. Fast forward to the last adventure I just played with them. We were 7th level, and had been wandering through a massive dungeon in search of a dragon's hoard. Standard stuff, and I think it was mostly from a published adventure. But the DM loved making the monsters much stronger than they normally would be. He would take kobolds and goblins and just give them the stats of young dragons at random, which proved to be fun, but also a little silly at times. After a while I started assuming that every enemy would be strong enough to OHKO my wizard, and started playing as cautiously as possible, which seemed to annoy the DM. So much that at one point, he decided that Apricot had to walk across the bridge before any other character. Marty said he could fly over it, but he was silenced, and I was told to roll. Brad and Lillian said nothing, and Snowflake continued trying to unlock the corpse of a mimic. So I figured I had no choice. This is where things got weird. I rolled my d20, and before even being told what I was rolling for, the DM says I fall into a pit below the bridge and get absorbed into a gelatinous cube. I laugh and roll my eyes, saying something like fine, I've been in tougher situations. But then he started describing _ what the cube was doing. He explained in very Very vivid detail that by being absorbed, Apricot was covered in goo, which began seeping into her clothing and into her body, into her holes, as he put it. The goo forced its way into her mouth, then into even less appropriate places, and I felt the blood drain from my face while I listened to this, completely dumbfounded. Up until this point, the campaign had some very odd moments, but never anything sexual, and certainly not to this magnitude. Apricot being a 10-year-old girl, I didn't even know what to say, and just didn't open my mouth for the rest of that session. As an encounter began for the rest of the party, Marty went about his business trying to chakeslam an earth elemental who had no neck, and Lillian eventually helped Brad climb a rope down into the cube's pit to save Apricot. It was the least comfortable I'd felt in my life. Easily, but it seemed like everyone else just brushed it off. Obviously, I talked to him about it after the session. Before going home for the night, he laughed and said something along the lines of, "Oh, now you're against sexual abuse? Come on, man, you were all gross and pervy for years. One little thing triggers you that hard? You see me complaining about you trying to fuck me for ages?" Again, I didn't know what to say. I was definitely a little bit creepy around him in high school, but that extended to mild flirting, which was admittedly unwarranted, and which I should have apologized for, and which never could have been considered sexual abuse. I convinced him to retcon Apricot's slimmer rape, and figured that would be the end of it. Like it was just some pent-up awkwardness from high school that he needed to let out after a long day at work. The next session was yesterday, and I wish I had been smart enough to not show up, with the rest of the party acting like nothing had happened. The DM quickly mentions that we decided to retcon the gelatinous cube thing, and we move on for a few hours of normal gamma play. Eventually we make it to the lair of a beholder named Sabbath, whose theme music was just every album Black Sabbath ever produced playing at random in the background. I breathed a sigh of relief at first, because it seemed like we'd just have our usual zany boss fight for a few hours and then go home. Unfortunately, after a few rounds, Apricot was struck by a paralysis eye beam and grappled by one of Sabbath's tentacles. I tensed up at the mention of tentacles, but for a while nothing creepy happened, so I relaxed. Brad managed to fire an exploding bullet right into Sabbath's main eye, turning off his anti-magic field for a while. So he suddenly decided that Apricot, as the only magic user in the party, was his main target. Once again, out of nowhere and with excruciating detail, the DM decides to describe the attack in an unexpected manner. Sabbath read as his mana draining ice talk we use spell points and call them mana and snakes it up into Apricot's robe. I sat there with my eyes wide and teeth clenched as he described it entering her paralyzed body, which I had no chance to save against, because apparently mana draining rape is a lair action. Brad was laughing in a Jude, gross kind of way. Snowflake was shaking his head and smiling awkwardly, and Marty listened intently to the DM's description of a slimy eye tentacle raping a 10-year-old girl. Lillian, with her fucking dwarf beard on, stared at me and just smirked like she was in on it, nodding her head along to the beat of Supernaut. Before he was done talking, I just stood up and left, suppressing the urge to vomit. I've never felt more betrayed or disgusted, and I still feel attached to Apricot and her place in his world. So it genuinely feels like someone was violated, if not my trust as a player, the character that I loved so much. All the good memories with our crazy party are going to slowly melt away, and all I'll be left with from my first experience with D&D is child rape. Epilogue. As I was typing this up, I got a text from Snowflake saying he quit the campaign too, after an argument broke out about me leaving. Whatever the reason for this weirdness was, he accused Lillian of wanting me gone, and it devolved into Nama killing. I suppose there's no going back anyway. Seems like even Marty was okay with all this. Sorry to leave this story on such a heavy note. I'd love to have had a more fun story, since our party's antics were actually wonderful for the longest time. But unfortunately I don't think it's going to make me smile much to remember anymore.